rest of the story. Once upon a time, town of Brookline, Massachusetts. In a second-floor apartment overlooking Harvard Street, there lived two girls, one of them Jacqueline, who was 13, her sister Barbara, who was only 9. To see them walking down the street together, one might have imagined that Jacqueline, who was obviously older, looked after her younger sister, but it was the other way around. For Jacqueline, learning disabled from birth, while appearing completely normal and healthy at first glance, would forever have the mind of a child. And thus was woven the tapestry of a poignant relationship, the threads of which often mismatched and unraveled, because, you see, it was Barbara, the younger sister, the so-called normal one, who felt left out, comparatively neglected, who envied the special treatment, the special attention that her parents always gave to Jacqueline. Indeed, while Barbara was no less loved, she was sometimes deprived of birthday parties, because Jacqueline had never had one, of socializing with friends, because Jacqueline had no friends of her own. In this way did Barbara share equally in those things which her sister did not have, while missing out on the things that she did have. But one day, there came into the lives of Jacqueline and Barbara somebody magical, and her gift to them is the rest of the story. Elizabeth Dorotheus. Elizabeth Dorotheus was a seamstress by trade, an elderly eccentric who lived in a Brookline boarding house, but who came to work for the family on Harvard Street. To the children, she was simply Dodie. Part Mary Poppins, part Mother Goose, at once very old and very young. Dodie started out mending clothing and making dresses, and yet in no time was babysitting the sisters when their parents were away. And what stories she could tell! Tales in which were concealed her own gentle philosophy and boundless wisdom. It was Dodie who taught Jacqueline and Barbara to pray each night before going to sleep. In fact, the very first Bible stories the girls ever heard, they heard from Dodie, and so it was that two troubled children came to love a stranger who became sort of a second mother. And something more. Ever so slowly, and ever so surely, the hurt in little Barbara's heart was healed by the old woman whose view of life became the cornerstone of Barbara's own view of life. For years, Dodie remained in the family employ, loving the youngsters in wondrous ways their parents could not. And then when Barbara was a senior in high school, beloved Dodie died. And yet even still, these many years later, in the quiet hours, away from the cacophony of a busy life, Barbara will sit and recall the warmth of a wrinkled hand, of a particular smile, or a sweet story told once upon a morning, or a whispered bedtime prayer. They were all Dodie's. Then do the other memories, the bitter ones, fade and die in the light of an unexpected love still held dear by Jacqueline's little sister, whom you know as journalist Barbara Walters. Only now you know the rest of the story.